Standing inside the cold glass conference room, watching my in-laws salivate over an estate they had not spent a single moment caring for, I finally understood why my husband's grandmother had smiled so knowingly when she handed me her worn leather poetry book just 3 days before she passed. She had whispered to wait for the videotape because it would force everyone to expose who they truly were. My sister-in-law, Victoria, had not even waited for the attorney to unlatch his briefcase before she started doing the math out loud, declaring that the $40 million estate belonged strictly to direct bloodlines and that I should not expect a single dime. She was the exact same woman who had spent years telling my husband that visiting an aging relative was a depressing chore, yet there she sat, practically drafting her luxury shopping list on a notepad. The high-powered estate attorney, Arthur Vance, peered over his thin wire frames with the quiet composure of a man who had guided dozens of wealthy families through public meltdowns. Sitting around the dark oak table was my husband, Christopher, his arrogant brother Julian, their mother Evelyn, and Victoria. Then there was me, the quiet pediatric nurse who had spent the last 8 years being treated like a second-class intruder who simply got lucky by marrying into their family. When Arthur suggested we begin the reading, my father-in-law cut him off with a loud grunt, demanding we hurry it up because important people had real business to handle. It was classic behavior from a family who considered my weekend shifts at the children's hospital a minor hobby, completely ignoring that while they were playing golf every Saturday, I was sitting at a bedside reading classic literature and watering orchids for a woman they had utterly abandoned. Arthur calmly opened a thick leather binder and asked if everyone named in the primary documents was present in the room. Evelyn sniffed, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet, and announced that since her mother only had 2 sons, the entire immediate family was already accounted for. Arthur checked his notes and politely corrected her, mentioning that 2 additional names were listed on the docket, including a hospice caregiver named Sarah and a primary physician named Dr. Miller. Julian burst out laughing, asking if the old woman had actually left small handouts for the hired help, suggesting the lawyer just mail them a couple $1,000s so the real family could divide the actual fortune. Christopher reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, but it was not a gesture of comfort. It was a tight, warning pressure telling me to keep my mouth shut, fall in line, and avoid causing any scenes. Before diving into the terms, Arthur asked if anyone in the family had attempted to access the main estate or its connected financial accounts since the funeral. A heavy silence fell over the room until Evelyn cleared her throat, claiming she had merely gone over to the property early to help organize things for the upcoming liquidators. I looked her dead in the eye and asked if organizing things meant clearing out the antique diamond brooches from the master bedroom safe. Every head at the table snapped toward me as Christopher gripped my wrist tightly, urging me to stop speaking. I did not flinch as I reminded Evelyn that I had driven by the estate on Tuesday afternoon to water the rare botanical collection and saw her leaving through the side entrance carrying 2 packed canvas totes. When she furiously accused me of slander, I pointed out that the property security system logged her entry code at 2 in the afternoon and captured her loading those bags into her trunk. Victoria slammed her hand on the wood, demanding to know why an outsider like me had access to the security logs in the first place. Arthur cleared his throat and clarified that the deceased had specifically assigned me as the primary security contact for the property grounds, which seemed to suck the air right out of the room. Victoria sneered, muttering that it was ridiculous considering the family had never even truly accepted me into their inner circle anyway. That part was true, because for the first 7 years of my marriage, I had politely addressed the matriarch as Mrs. Montgomery to respect the cold boundaries the family had established. It was only a year ago that the sweet woman grabbed my wrist, laughed, and told me that 8 years was far too long for formal titles, insisting I call her grandma since her actual blood relatives rarely bothered to remember she was still breathing. Arthur cleared his voice and officially began reading the last will and testament of Eleanor Montgomery, executed exactly 6 months ago to supersede all previous filings. Christopher sat up straight, his face tightening as he questioned why his grandmother would rewrite her entire legal legacy so late in her life. Arthur maintained his professional composure and noted that the client was exceptionally clear about her timing and intentions. The terms began with a bequest to her eldest son, who received a grand total of $500, representing the exact amount he had once claimed was too expensive to spend on an airline ticket to visit her for the holidays. He froze in absolute shock, his mouth hanging open as Arthur seamlessly moved on to Julian, who was gifted a set of dusty, rusted golf clubs to match the time he chose the country club over visiting his dying mother. Julian jumped up in rage, slamming his fist onto the table, but Arthur did not miss a beat as he read the bequest for Evelyn. She was left a collection of cheap costume jewelry from the nightstand drawer, accompanied by a note stating that since she could never tell the difference between genuine value and cheap imitations, the glass beads suited her personality perfectly. I had to bite the inside of my cheek just to keep from laughing out loud. Next came Victoria, who received a vintage set of high society etiquette books, along with a written hope that she might finally learn that openly calculating a person's net worth while standing beside their casket was considered utterly trashy. Victoria turned a shade of deep crimson, having done that exact thing at the cemetery while guessing the market value of the main residence. Finally, Arthur reached Christopher's name, declaring that his grandmother left him a single box containing a spine-strengthening medical brace, in the hope that he might one day learn how to stand up for himself. Christopher slowly let go of my hand, staring at the floor in disbelief as Arthur read the scathing critique of how he had allowed his family to treat his dedicated wife like a nameless servant for nearly a decade while canceling basic visits just to appease his mother. The room erupted into absolute chaos, with Evelyn screaming about undue influence and Julian threatening to sue the entire legal firm for allowing an incompetent old woman to alter her estate. Arthur simply reached into his briefcase, pulled out a flash drive, and connected it to a large monitor on the wall, announcing that Eleanor had recorded a mandatory video statement to accompany the final reading. The display flickered to life, showing Grandma Eleanor sitting comfortably in her wingback chair, looking sharp, focused, and completely unimpressed. She leaned toward the camera and greeted the room as a pack of vultures, warning them that any attempt to claim she was not of sound mind would fail instantly, as she had voluntarily undergone full psychiatric evaluations with Dr. Miller specifically to shut down their future lawsuits. She systematically listed every cancelled holiday, every ignored phone call, and every time someone had tried to manipulate her into signing over power of attorney. She revealed that she was wide awake when her son tried to take pictures of her financial ledgers while pretending she was napping, and she called out Victoria for bringing a private real estate broker to evaluate the home under the guise of an afternoon visit. The family sat in stunned, terrified silence as Eleanor held up a small black notebook, revealing that she had meticulously documented every theft, every insult, and every cruel comment they had ever made behind closed doors. Then her face softened as she turned her attention toward the screen to address me, explaining to the room that I was the only person who had treated her like a human being rather than an impending payday. She reminded everyone that I had shown up every single Saturday out of genuine affection, bringing home-cooked meals, reading her favorite poems, and using my professional medical knowledge to keep her comfortable without ever asking for a single favor in return. She looked directly into the lens and told me not to let them guilt me, because I was the only person who had shown her what a real family actually looked like. Arthur paused the video and announced that the remaining $40 million, including all properties, investment portfolios, and liquid assets, were bequeathed entirely to me as her true heir. Victoria shrieked in horror and tried to lung across the table toward me, but Arthur's private security guards immediately stepped in front of her while Christopher stared at me as if I were an absolute stranger. Arthur unpaused the final seconds of the recording, where Eleanor delivered her parting blow. She warned them that if any single family member attempted to contest the document, they would be immediately stripped of their minor tokens and prosecuted for grand theft regarding the missing jewelry and property, as she had filed formal police reports and gathered witness statements prior to her passing. The threat of criminal prosecution instantly extinguished their rage, leaving the room in a suffocating, terrifying silence. Arthur closed his laptop and declared the meeting officially concluded, confirming that the main estate belonged to me effective immediately and suggesting that I move into the residence right away to take possession of my new life. Christopher turned to me with a cracked, desperate voice, asking if I had planned this all along. I looked at him with profound sadness, telling him that while his family was busy appraising his grandmother's furniture, I was busy monitoring her heart rate, and while they were taking pictures of her bank statements, I was taking photos of her smiling on her good days. I stood up, looked at the man I had spent 8 years defending, and told him that his grandmother was entirely right about his cowardice. I gathered my belongings, walked past his glaring relatives, and left the building without looking back once. In the quiet of my car, I wept not for the sudden fortune, but for the brilliant woman who had seen my true worth when everyone else made me feel invisible. I drove straight to the grand estate, unlocked the front door, and walked into the quiet sunroom where her favorite orchids were bathed in afternoon light. Opening the leather poetry book she had handed me days prior, I found a handwritten note tucked into the back cover, reminding me that true wealth is never found in bank accounts, but in the precious hours we choose to spend with the people who truly value our presence.